Welcome back to Namaste Node.js Season 2 and we are building Dev Tinder. In this episode, we are going to talk about the most crucial part of any application, which is data and the database. Okay, so we are going to create our first database. We are going to connect to that database. We are connect our application to that database. We will try to add some data into that database. We will get some data from the database. We will create our first actual API which will bring data from the database. We are going to do a lot more amazing things. We are going to create MongoDB documents. We are going to create MongoDB schema, MongoDB model, and a lot of jargons will be covered in this episode. Hope you are excited as I am. So let's just get started quickly without wasting any time. Now let us start with the first thing. The first thing we will do is we will connect our application to the database. How will you do that? First of all, let me tell you, we are using MongoDB and I already showed you in the season 1 that how you can create a MongoDB cluster on the official MongoDB website. Remember, we created a free cluster. Right? So let us go back to that cluster, log into your MongoDB dashboard, and over there you created a cluster. Remember, I created Namaste node over here. So I will be using the same cluster and I will be creating a database inside this cluster. Okay. So first thing is we want to connect to this cluster. Okay, we will have to connect to this cluster. There were multiple ways of connecting to this cluster. And if you remember, we already connected to this cluster using MongoDB Compass. If you don't know what I'm talking about, what is MongoDB Compass or what is MongoDB Atlas, the official website, then please go and check the season 1. And I don't remember the episode number, but there was an episode specifically for database, right? Go to that episode and rewatch it if you don't remember it. But then we created a cluster on the official MongoDB website, right? This cluster. And we also came to MongoDB Compass and connected to that cluster, right? Now, and we saw how we can basically see the data inside that cluster and inside that database, right? But now I want my application to connect to this cluster and create a new database. How would we do that? Let me just explain you. Okay, so for that we will need a connection string. Right? So I can take the connection string from here also, right? If you go over here, you can take the connection string, but an easier way to take the connection string is from here, right? Yes, I want this. This is my connection string, right? This is basically the URL that is only required to connect to the database, right? And over here, this is the username. And this is the password. If you remember this, right? This is the username, this is the password, and this is the URL for the cluster that we are fetching data from, right? Or we are connecting to, right? So we need this URL to connect our application to this database, right? And if I connect over there, my MongoDB Compass will be connected to our cluster, and now we can fetch data from here. Remember, we created this hello world, right? We had a user and we added some data onto the database. Remember all this? We did in the season 1. Now we are going to, similarly, like we created a database hello world, right? Similarly, we will create a new database over here, which will be Dev Tinder, and we will work inside that. Okay. But first of all, let us just connect our application to this cluster. Okay. Then only we will be able to do anything. So how would you connect your application to this cluster? Now remember very carefully and listen to me very carefully. This is our application. First thing you will have to do is you will have to create a config folder, right? And I will create my config folder inside the src folder, right? Let's create a config folder. All the configuration files and anything you find inside, right? Anything you want to configure in your app, just use this config folder, right? Put everything inside it. So I am just creating this config folder and adding a file to it, which is known as database.js. Right? This is the database file which I want to create, and over here I will write the logic to connect to our database. Okay? Do you understand that? To connecting to the database, right? To talk to database, we will be using an important npm library, and that npm library is known as Mongoose, right? That npm library is known as Mongoose, right? In season 1, we did not use this Mongoose, But in season 2, we are going to use this library Mongoose because this is a standard of building the Node.js MERN applications, right? Whenever you are connecting your Node.js application to your Mongo database, Mongoose is a very elegant, very amazing library to create schemas, to create models, and to talk to your MongoDB database, right? So we are going to use this library. It is very, very amazing, okay? And it gives you some boilerplate also, code also, right? You can copy this code. You can also go and read the documentation. The documentation of Mongoose is really very, very nice, right? There are some websites, there are some libraries and packages where the documentation is not really good, but Mongoose has a very good documentation, and we will be referring to this documentation again and again, right? Whenever I get a chance, I will come over here and I will show you that how you can refer to this documentation so that you get your hands onto it, right? So that you are familiar with this documentation, because you might ever need it, right? So that you can just take the reference if you want to do something inside the Mongoose, right? If you want to do something inside MongoDB, so that you can come over here and you can just refer to the documentation whenever you want to do anything. Okay, so you can just go over here, you can click on quick start, or you can just read a little more about it. But okay, do it offline. But for now, let me just tell you that how to use this Mongoose in your project and connect to the database. Okay, so now let us just go over here back in database.js file, and first of all, let us just install Mongoose, right? What is the code of writing? How do you install a package? Right? How do you install a package? A simple command is npm install mongoose, or you can also write the short form for it, npm I mongoose, right? You write npm I mongoose, and it is now installing the Mongoose library, Mongoose package into your application, and it has already been added inside your package.json. If you will go to package.json, you get your Mongoose over here. If you will go to your node modules, you will find all the code of Mongoose there in your system, right inside your node modules. Okay, so Mongoose is now available to us, and now we can use Mongoose right away. Okay, so first of all, how would we do it? First of all, let's just import Mongoose, right? Not import Mongoose, sorry. Let's do const Mongoose is equals to require Mongoose. We have got Mongoose with us. Now, to connect to the database, a simple query or a simple statement is mongoose.connect, right? And we pass in the database connection URL over here, right? The database connection URL. This is all we need to connect to the database, right? To the cluster, basically, not the database, to the cluster, right? This is referring to the cluster. So this is how you connect, right, to the Mongoose cluster. But this is not a good way, right? This is not a good way. A good way is to wrap this thing inside an async function and call an await. See, this basically, this thing, right? Mongoose.connect returns you a promise, right? And then it also tells you whether the connection was successfully established or it was not successfully established, right? So basically, you can just use async await and wait for the response of this promise and accordingly handle whatever happened, right? So basically, let me just tell you a good way of writing this. Just create a function and let's call this as connectdb, right? Connectdb. Let's call this as connectdb, and over here, let's create a async function, right? This is a proper way of doing this. Let's create a async function, right? Inside this async function, what will I do? I will basically await mongoose.connect and the same thing, right? What I'm trying to do is I am just having this function, and this function, whenever I will call this function, it will just connect to this mongoose.connect. It will just connect to our database over here. Now what we will do is we will now just call this function connectdb, right? We will call this function, and then I can do, because it returns a promise, right? Because it returns a promise, what we will do is I can then just do a then, right? And then I can handle the happy case, or I can also write catch, and I can catch any errors if they are there, right? Basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to connect to the database. If the database connection is successful, I can just log it, right? Basically, I can say database connection is successful, right? Database connected successfully, right? Database connection established, right? So this I can say, right? Or database, or I can just throw an error also, right? I can just throw an error, or I can just log to the console, right? Console.error error, and then I can say that database cannot be connected or something like that, right? Cannot be established, right? Database cannot be connected, right? Let's call this as database cannot be connected. Okay, and then I can also print the error message if I want to. But what I'm trying to say is connectdb is the function that we need to call. This will return us a promise, and then I can handle the happy case and the bad case also over here. Got it? Now what we will do is, now when we run our application, will it connect to database? Tell me. If I'll do npm run dev, will it connect to database? The answer is no. Why the answer is no? Because this is a separate file, right? And whenever we are doing npm run dev, we are basically running this app.js file. This is the main file. So it does not know that database needs to be connected. So what we will do is, let me just, first of all, okay, let me just get rid of all the code that we were writing in the previous episode. Okay, just let me get rid of all of it, because we don't need anything right now, right? Right? Do you see this? I have cleared all the code. I will be starting everything from scratch again, right? Now what I will do is, I will just require that database file over here, right? I will just do a require R-E-Q-U-I-R-E, require. And what I will do is, I will just refer to config/database. Okay. So this is my file. I have saved it. And now if I save it and the code reruns, do you see this? Database connection established. Right? Database connection established. That means our database, or basically our application, the library Mongoose, has successfully established the connection with the database. And let me not call this as database, because this is referring to the cluster. So it is basically connected to the cluster, right? And this cluster, right? This is the cluster, and inside this cluster there are multiple types of databases, right? So how can you reference to database, right? Let me tell you one more important thing. If you will add the word hello world over here, right? If you will add the name of the database over here, so now it will connect to the specific database hello world, right? If you are not connecting to this, this is referring to the cluster, right? The whole cluster, right? In the cluster, there can be multiple databases, but we want to create a new database. So let us just write in front of this string dev Tinder. Okay. So dev Tinder will be a new database, which will be created inside that cluster, right? Don't you worry, right now you will not see it over here, but dev Tinder is the one which will come over here, and we will do everything inside that whole database. Got it? So what I have told you till now, first thing is, now I want to connect to this dev Tinder database, which is on this cluster. So always remember that your this connection string should be perfectly fine and valid. Your password should be correct. Your username should be correct, right? And your reference to the cluster is correct, right? Take this connection string from the official MongoDB website. That is when it will work. If you face any problems, just go Google things up and then try to connect to database and run this code till you find a database connection established successfully in your laptop. Okay, so this is how you connect to database. And when I require this file, whenever I require this file in my app.js, basically now whenever you are running this app.js code, this line also runs and all the code of this file also runs, and we are connected to database successfully. Basically now we have a valid, strong database connection established by Mongoose library from our app, and now we can just start putting some data into the database and reading some data from the database. We can do a lot more amazing cool things, right? So hope you are excited. But before moving ahead, I want to tell you an important thing over here. want to tell you an important thing. This is not the right and the best way of connecting to the database, right? So basically what I am trying to do is I am just writing require and I am referring to this file and I am just assuming that the database is connected successfully, right? When you will run this code, what is happening is, see, server is successfully listening on the port and then it says database connection established. So what is happening is server has started listening to the calls at 777. Basically, see, app.listen. See, let me just explain you once again. Okay, this is becoming a little confusing. Let me just explain you once again. Listen to me very, very carefully. See, whenever this file is running this code, right? App.listen 777. And it says server is successfully listening on 777. Basically, now, whenever this app.listen code is run, right? Basically now my server has started accepting some request. But what if my server has already started listening to the request, but my database is not connected? It will be a big problem, right? Now people are hitting our APIs, but the database connection is not successfully established. It's a bad thing, isn't it? Right? So the right process is to first of all connect to your database, then listen on to the server, right? Basically, first of all, connect to the database, then listen to this server. Basically, what I am trying to say is, once your database connection has successfully established, then only you do app.listen. Very, very important thing. Got it? Once your database is successfully connected, then you should do app.listen. That means once your ConnectDB is successful, once your code reaches over here you should ideally do your app.listen. Got it? This is the point where you should do app.listen. But now, how will I do this over here? Because this is in some other file. So what I will do is basically, I will just export my connection DB from here and I will import it inside app.js and I will call this function in my app.js file. Okay, so just see what I am trying to do. I am writing module.exports, right? And I will just export my function, right? Export this function from this file. What I will now do is, right, I have just exported this function, right? I am not connecting to the database over here. I have just created this function to connect to the database, but I'm not connecting it right away. What I will do is I will go to my app.js file. I will just import that ConnectDB function. How will I import it? ConnectDB, right? I will import that ConnectDB from this database. And now over here, I will connect to that database. And once my database connection is successfully established, then I will call app.listen. Do you see this? Do you see this? And do you understand why we are doing so? This is the proper way of making a database connection in your application. See, when you were doing it in the old fashion, right? When you were writing ConnectDB, when you were calling ConnectDB over here, things can still work perfectly fine, right? If everything works fine in the happy case, everything will work perfectly fine. But the right way of connecting to the server and starting your application is, first of all, connect to the database, then start your application, then basically start listening to the API calls. Right? Because if you will not do it in this order, but think about a case where database is not successfully connected and your app started listening to the API request, right? The app has started up, but your database is not connected successfully. That can cause problems, isn't it? There would be users who are hitting your APIs and then you are not still connected to your database. So always connect to your database, then call app.listen. Because once you call app.listen, that means your server has started. So start your server only after you connect to database. See, earlier the order was very different, right? See, earlier the order was server is successfully listening to port 777 and then database connection established. But now the order is different. First of all, we are giving priority to the database. Then we are basically starting the server. These are the two different things you need to take care of, and we have now successfully connected our database to our application. Now we will start creating the schema inside the database, right? We will do all of it. But before that, I would want you all to take a pause at this point of time. Pause the video over here and do your homework. What is your homework right now? Let me just write it down. So the first homework is connect your application. First of all, if you haven't done so, just create a cluster in the MongoDB official website, right? Create a free cluster. It's available for free if you haven't done it already. But if you have watched the season 1 and if you have implemented it already, then you would have already created a cluster. But if you haven't done that, please do that right now. Create a free cluster on MongoDB official website, right? MongoDB official website. Right? And that is known as Mongo Atlas, right? Mongo Atlas, right? If you don't know it, MongoDB Atlas, right? And then connect your application to, then install Mongoose, right? Because installing Mongoose is very, very important. Install Mongoose library. You will have to follow all of it. Now, once you have installed the Mongoose library, now you will have to connect your application to the database, right? And remember, it is database, not the cluster, right? The connection string over here has a /devtinder. This devtinder is the name of the database. I will show you right away where that database is created, but this devtinder means you are connecting to the devtinder database. Okay, connect your application to the database. Okay, now database /devtinder, right? And then always get the connection URL. This is the connection URL, right? Connection URL that you have to take in over here, right? You can just, let me just remove this. This is the connection URL /devtinder. You will have to get this connection request. And what else you will do? Now you will have to basically call the connectDB function and connect to database before starting application on 7777. Remember, so before you start listening on port number 7777, your database should be connected. This is your homework. Pause the video right away over here and finish your homework, and then come back. We will come back and we'll start creating schema for our database. Okay, so let's just do that. Welcome back, my dear friends. Hope you have connected to the database now. Your application is now successfully connected to the database and you are listening to port number 7777. So let us now just move ahead and create our first schema. What do you mean by schema of a database? See, whenever you are creating a database, suppose you are putting some user information into the database, right? We have our application. We have already seen that diagram, right? Let us go back. Where is the user, right? We created the database design. Remember? I don't remember where it is. Oh my God, we have just gone very far. But let me just open. Yes, this was the place, right? I was discussing about DB design over here. In this DB design, I told you that there will be different collections, right? There will be different collection, basically a new table. And one collection, the first collection will be our user collection, right? This is our user collection. What do you mean by a user collection is inside that database, we will have a collection of all the users, right? We will have a collection of all the users. And before I create a collection, I will have to create a schema of a user. What do you mean by schema? Schema is basically you can assume that it's a way, it's an identity, right? It's an identity for that collection documents, right? Basically, suppose if I say that I'm creating a user schema, basically I am defining a user, right? So how do you define a user? Basically, schema means, creating a schema means you are telling that what all things you will store in this user collection, right? What can a user have? The user can have a first name, the user can have a last name, the user can have an email ID, user can have a password, user can have a lot more other details about the user. All of that we will be storing inside user collection, and for creating that we would need a schema, right? So let us just create a schema, and we will again create this schema using mongoose, right? So in the mongoose, if you will go over here, just go to schema over here, right? In the documentation, go to schema, right? It gives you a good tutorial of how do you define a schema. Go ahead and explore it, read about a lot that how you can create a new schema, right? But let me just show you how to create a user schema for our application, right? But you can go and reference it. Why I am just giving you the reference of this documentation again and again, so that you can refer to it anytime, right? See, I remember all the code, right? Now I have written a lot of code inside Node.js. I have written this mongoose. I have created a lot of mongoose schema. So I remember the code now. But what I am trying to say is I can just code it without even seeing the documentation. But I am referring to this documentation again and again, so that you know that if you get stuck into this schema, or if you want to read more about schema, what is the place you can go and what is the place you can go and read more about all these concepts. This is the source of truth. This is the source of truth of everything. If you ask me, Akshay, where have you learnt it? I have learnt from a lot of resources, blogs, videos, this, that, books. But the major source has always been this documentation. I have always referred to this documentation to strengthen my knowledge and fulfill my curiosity, right? Everything, whatever is there inside Mongoose is present over here, right? So you can go and read about everything. Even I will not be covering everything from here, right? There are so many things inside Mongoose. I can specifically create a Namaste Mongoose for this Mongoose library. It's such a huge library it is, right? But I will be covering the most essential and basic portion of Mongoose, right? But I would request you to please keep referring to the documentation, so that you are very good at referring to the documentation wherever needed. Okay, so let's just get started and create our first schema. So the good way to create a schema is to, and we call this as, first of all, we will create a schema, then we will create a model, right? I will tell you the difference between them. But first of all, let us create a schema. For that, I will create another folder, right? This folder, and let us call that folder, I will create it inside the src folder, right? And in the src folder on the top level, I will create the folder which is named as models, right? We are basically creating a model. We are modeling our database, right? So we will create a user model, right? You will understand everything. Don't worry about it. But first of all, just listen that you create this model folder over here, and then you have a user.js. Over here, at this place, I will define what a user in our database is, right? What fields this user collection will have, right? All of things will be defined over here. So let us just first start creating the schema. For that, I would require mongoose, right? Mongoose require mongoose, right? We have got this mongoose over here. Now I will create a user schema, right? You create a user schema, and then how do you create a schema? So schema is a function on top of mongoose, right? You can do mongoose.schema, right? And then, right, you can just pass in an object over here. Pass in some object over here. And over here, you can just pass in all the parameters that define a user, right? This is where you create the actual schema. So what you will do is, right, you can do user schema, and then you can write mongoose.schema, and over here I will pass in first name, right? So how do you pass in first name? So see, some people write first underscore name. Some people try to follow camel casing. Some people try to do different kind of things. But let me tell you, a good and a very favorable way of writing inside Mongoose and MongoDB is to use such type of names, right? Don't use underscore. See, you can use underscore. You will find a lot of people writing like this, right? First name. But I would say that this is not a right nomenclature. See, there is nothing like right or wrong. You can still use underscore everywhere and everything will work perfectly fine for you. But a good way, and what MongoDB basically, recommends is to use camel casing. And I don't even know whether MongoDB recommends it or not, but this is what I feel is a good way of using things, right? Keep your naming convention as camel casing, right? Use like this, right? And I would use like this, right? Always in my application. So throughout all the videos, all the episodes that you will see me writing camel case. I will not be writing snake case or that underscore kind of a thing, right? I will not be doing that. Okay. So what user schema will have, what a user will have a first name. Now, first name, and then you write an object over here. And then again, you pass in a type over here, and you will tell what type does this first name is. Your first name is type of a string, right? Your first name is a string, isn't it? Suppose if you have a number, right? Suppose if you are writing age, then you will write number over here. Got it? So similarly, you define the type. So let us just go ahead. Let's create first name. Then I can create last name. Type is equals to string, right? And then what else I can create? I can create maybe, let's say, email ID, right? Email ID, right? Email ID. And then I can write type, and then I can write string over here again. And then I can also write password, right? Why not? Email, password. What else can be there? Okay. What else can be there? It is again of type string, right? And then what else can be there? I have first name, last name, email, password, and then I can have maybe age, right? I can add age also. And then I can write type, and then I can write number over here, right? After age, I can also write one more thing. Let's write gender, right? Inside this gender, I can again give a type to it, and let's call this as string only, right? It can be of type male, female, or others, right? It is again a string. So this is how basically you define a schema. And this schema basically tells you what all information about the user are we storing into our database, right? What this user schema can store or hold, right? These are the legit fields that can be present inside this user collection. And what is the type of data does this fields hold? Got it? So this is how you define a schema, and defining a schema is very, very important. There are a lot more things we will do in this schema, right? There are a lot more things we can define in this schema, but we will come on to that a little bit later. But first of all, let me just show you how you can start using this schema, right? How you can basically start putting some data, or how you can start to use this schema in real life. Okay. Once you have created a schema, now we create a mongoose model, right? Now we create a mongoose model. So, and how do you create a model is, let me just tell you, you do mongoose.model, right? And then you write the name of the model, right? So we will create a user model. Okay. And then the second thing that you will pass, first thing is the name of the model. The second thing is the schema that you will pass, right? This is how you create the user model, right? User model, right? We created the user model, and then you can just export module.exports, right? Module.export, exports, right? And you can just export this user model over here, right? Basically, I will just tell you what is model and everything, right? So what we have done is user model, right? So what we have done is, first of all, we created the user schema. How did we create it? First of all, we got mongoose from our library. Then we created a user schema by using mongoose.schema. Sometimes some people also do this like this, right? New mongoose schema, but you don't need the word new, I think, right? You don't need it, right? How would you get to know, right? First of all, go to mongoose over here, and you just go to schemas and see if it is required or not. Cool. So it is kind of like required. So let us just use it. But I think if you don't even write it, it still works. But if the documentation is suggesting it, then why not use it, right? So, and then see how they are doing is, they have just taken out schema like this from the mongoose, and they are using new schema like this. Or else you can also do it like this, or else you can use mongoose.schema. It's one and the same thing. And let us also write the keyword new, because Why not? The documentation recommends it. But I think this also works fine like this, right? Then we create a model, right? How do you create a model? Mongoose.model like this. And if you want to see the same thing inside the documentation, you can go creating a model, right? See, this is how you create a model, right? Basically, constant blog is equals to mongoose.model blog. And this is blog schema, right? This is how you create it, mongoose.model user, and you get your user schema, right? And one more thing I would like to tell you is that whenever you are referencing to a model, the name always starts with a capital letter. Basically, see, name when it starts with a capital letter says that, okay, it is kind of like a mongoose model. It is basically a user, right? It is defining a collection. It is and you know what, right? Let me tell you, this is like a class, right? Assume that, see, whenever you create a database, right? MongoDB database, you create collection inside it, right? That collection will hold some data. So you can assume that, okay, this is like a user class, and then we will create small new instances of that class. Whenever a new user will come in, so it will be a new type of instance of that model, right? Basically, see, this is the definition of the model, right? This schema defines this model, right? And then this model is basically a class which will create its own instances, right? This model will create its own instances. Suppose if a user came in, suppose a user Akshay comes into your website, right? So it is of type user, right? And it will go into the user collection, right? That's how things are. We will see that in practical just in a while, but this is how I would like to define it. If you want to read the formal definition, then you can just go ahead and read the formal definition of things, right? You can just explore more about it. But this is basically a thing, right? First of all, you create a schema, then you create a model out of it. Now with this model, I will create new instances. Suppose I will have to add a new user. So I will create a new instance of this model and I will put it into the database. So let us see how you can do it. So see, I have written user over here. You can write it user like this. And I can also tell you that, okay, in some places you will find people directly writing like this, right? I have also seen that people directly write like this, okay? They don't want to write it in some other line. So basically what they are trying to do is they have created a schema. Once they have created the schema, they are just directly exporting the model from this file over here. Right? Once you have exported this model, you have created and defined how the user should look like, then let us just go and start creating our APIs, right? Now you can create an API to add a user into a database. How will you do that? Right? How will you do that? Let me just show it to you by writing an API. But before that, I would want you to do a homework. That homework is to create a user schema, right? Create a user schema, right? This is the homework that you have to do. Create a user schema in your laptop, right? In your project, and then come back with us, right? And over here, you can add as many fields you want to. I have just added these couple of fields. You can add more fields if you want to, right? But it is up to you. Create a user schema, create basically a models folder, then create a user, create the schema, and then create a model, right? Create the user schema and user model, and then come back, and I will then move ahead and start creating our API, which will add some data into the database. We will add our first document into our user collection, and it will be very, very fun, my dear friends. Okay, so pause this video right now over here, go back, do your homework, and come back again, and I would see you very soon. Welcome back, my dear friends. So hope you would have created your user schema and user model, and now we are all set to create our first API, which will insert the data into the database. Are you ready for that? Let us just do it, right? Let's just do it. Let's create an API. And you already know how to create an API inside your app.js. Let us just start creating an API. You already know that, isn't it? Right? Let me just close this up for now. Yep. Okay. Okay. So let's just create our API. You already know. Okay. So first of all, tell me what is the best HTTP method if I want to add some data into the database. What is the HTTP method? Is it get? Is it post? Is it patch? Is it delete? Your answer is absolutely right. We will create a post API. We will create a post API. Remember when we were doing LLD? Right? Remember when we were doing LLD and I told you in the API design that what kind of HTTP methods can be there? Get, post, put, patch, delete, right? So we will be using this post method and we will create an API which will sign up the user, isn't it? It will create a user, right? Or basically you can think about it, we are creating this API, right? This is signing up the API, right? You are signing up a user, right? So can I create this post API sign up? How would you do it? Let me just show it to you. Okay. So what I will do is how, right? Remember, how do you create a post API? How do you create a post API? Do you remember that? I have told you in the previous episodes. So you create a post API by app.post, right? You write it like this, isn't it? This is the route handler I told you, right? So what I will do, I will create a app.post and over here, what should I write route? So this route should be the exact name of the API, right? The exact name of API that we want to create is sign up. So let us just create it. Let's call this as sign up. Okay. Now we have created this sign up API. Now I will write request, comma response, right? And then I will write our logic to add data into that database. But first thing is I will go very slow, right? I will go with basics, right? I will explain you like I would explain it to a child, right? I will explain you in a very, very basic thing. Okay. First of all, let us just create some dummy data, right? Let's suppose we have some user object, right? Let's call this as user object. I have the basic dummy information about the user and let's call this user as first name, right? So first name of that user is, let's say, Akshay Saini, right? I want to add Akshay Saini user. Okay, so this is first name. So I've added Akshay and my user has last name. So basically a user is signing up to your website, right? Just like we signed up on tinder.com, isn't it? Right? If you go to tinder.com, remember if you create an account, it asks you for basic information. So right now it is not asking me for it, but assume that, okay, when you are creating an account, it takes first name, last name, email ID and your password. Okay. So let's build it like that, right? Our API takes first name, last name, and then I will take email ID, right? Email ID, and let's call this as akshay@saini.com, right? You can write whatever email ID you want to, and then last name, email ID, and then password. Okay. Password. Okay. Our password is akshay@123. Cool. So I can write this password. So this is my user object. Now suppose if we have created this user obj and I want to save this user into our MongoDB database, right? Into our user collection, how would we do it? For that, we would need to create a new instance of our model, right? On what model? We created a model, right? This user model. We will create a new instance of this user model, right? And then we would add this database to that model and we will save that instance, right? I would show you how you do that, all of it, right? First of all, you need to get that model, user model over here. How would you do that? You would just do a require. Okay. And then in require, I would do models/user. Now my user model is over here. Now what I'll do is I will create a new instance, right? I will write the word new and then I will define user, and in the user I will pass in a user obj. right? So what I am trying to do with this line is I am creating a new user with this data. Got it? So basically this line means I am creating a new user with this data. But if you want to call this technically, I am creating a new instance of a user model. Okay. What I'm trying to do, basically you should be able to communicate also in words, right? Creating a new instance, right? Instance means you are creating a new instance, right? Of a user model, of the user model, right? How do you create an instance of the user model? You write the keyword new, you write the keyword user, right? The name of the model, and then you pass in the data of that new model that you want to save, right? So I wanted to save this data. You can write it like this. Another way of writing it is just write this data directly over here, right? So if I want to remove it, I can remove it, right? So basically I am creating a new instance of my user model. Once I have created a new instance of this user model, what I will have to do is I will have to do a user dot save, right? Once I do a user dot save, right? Because this is an instance of a model and you call a dot save on top of it, right? This is the instance of a user model, you call dot save. So this data will be saved onto our database. And this function will basically return you a promise, right? This function basically returns you a promise. Basically most of the Mongoose functions, whenever you are putting some data onto the database, whenever you are saving it, whenever you are getting the data, all of these functions, all of these methods, all of these APIs will return you a promise. So most of the times you will have to use async await, right? So you will have to await for user to save, and when you will use await, you will have to make your function async as well, right? So I will create this function, I will make this API async, right? This basically the handler function as async. And once I have this async function, I will just do a await user.save. So this user will be saved for us, right? This user will be saved into the database. This is all code you need to add a new user to the database, my dear friends. We have created an API which is storing a dummy data into our database. It is creating a new instance of a model. You have to always remember what I'm saying. You are creating a new instance of this model user and you are passing the data over here. Now what will happen is whenever you do, and this new instance comes inside this user, and whenever you do a user.save, it will save this database data into the database. Do you want to see this in action? How would you see this in action? Tell me, right? You will have to make an API call, and right, you will have to make an post API call to /signup, right? You will have to make a post API call to /signup. And how do you make a post API call to /signup? You already know that we will be making an API call to /signup by going over here to our postman and creating a new request, creating a new post request. Okay. So first of all, these were our testing routes. So let me just remove it, right? I don't want all of these routes, right? Let me just remove it. Let's start fresh, right? Let us start creating APIs, right? Let us just start fresh. Let us create a new request, HTTP request. I want to create a post request and the URL is localhost /7777 and sign up. Okay. Now, this is the sign up API. If I will hit send, it will make a post API call to our server, right? Let me just save this API first of all, and let me just rename it to /signup. This is a better way to write it up. Cool. Post /signup. Okay. Post, and then I can call this as sign up. Okay. Now I will click on send now. I am crossing my fingers. Hope everything works well. If I will click on send. Okay. Now, if I click on send, what will be the response? my response will be nothing because I have not sent anything back. It will be lost in the world. Remember? Infinite response. So basically, I forgot to do a main thing, which is sending back the response, right? Once you have saved the user, let us send back the response, and let's say response.send, and let us say user added successfully. Okay, got it? So I have saved it. Now if I make an API call and if I get this user added successfully back, right, over here, that means we have stored data into the database. Let us click on it. Are you excited? Fingers crossed. Let me just hit it. 3, 2, 1, click. And we have got this user added successfully. And I am super excited to go to my database and see whether we have got any data or not, or I am just writing some things in the dreams, right? I am writing it in a dream and everything I am expecting to work, right? Let us go back to our MongoDB compass. Over here, just refresh the databases. Right now, you don't see dev tinder over here. As soon as you will refresh, you will see a dev tinder over here. Do you see this? If you will go inside dev tinder, you will see a users. And when you click on users, do you see this data that I recently pushed in? This data has come up over here with us. Amazing, right? This data which I passed in over here has just come in over here inside our dev tinder database in the user collection, right? And over here, we have got this document with us. Always remember the nomenclature. This is known as one document. This is known as a collection, right? User collection. And this is a database. This dev tinder is a database. Users is a collection. And this is one document inside a collection. Okay? And these are different fields over here. We have our first name, last name, email ID, password. Should we add another user? How would you add? Let us just add something else. Let us add Virat Kohli, right? Why not? Let's add Virat Kohli, Virat, and let's add Virat at kohli.com, and then let's add Virat at the rate 123 and save it, right? Once we have saved it, now let us make one more API call. If I hit send, if I go over here, I don't see my document. I have to refresh it. If I refresh my database, and do you see, I have one more document added to my database. Now, an amazing thing is, now you already know how this happened, right? If I have to recap everything, I created a post API, sign up. I created this async function. You know why we created async function? Because I am using await over here, right? And I am creating a new instance of a user model by passing in some dummy data over here. And I am doing user.save. And then I am sending back the response from the API. I am getting this response back 200, okay, user added successfully. And my user is added to my database, right? I have inserted our document into our database. Amazing, right? Hope you are excited by entering the first thing into the database, isn't it? Right? So it was amazing. Now, I would want to tell you few more important things over here, right? These are the database. Now, an interesting thing to see over here, what MongoDB does is, it creates these two fields automatically. See, I added first name, last name, email ID, password, but I never gave it __ v. I never gave it _ID. What are these fields? These fields are created by MongoDB itself, right? This ID field, whenever you will add any document to the MongoDB database, MongoDB will automatically give it _ID. It will automatically give it __ v. This ID basically is a unique string, unique object, and we also call this as an MongoDB object ID. This is a unique ID. It's very important. It's very useful. It will be very helpful to us also. When we will go ahead, you will see that it is very helpful for us, right? And these IDs are uniquely identifying data into the database, right? This is a very important thing about MongoDB, right? These IDs are automatically created. Don't try to mess up with these IDs ever. You can mess up with these IDs, right? Nothing will happen. I can just double click and I can just change it, right? I can just try to alter it. I can just modify it also. I can just even pass in an ID from here also. Can I pass in an ID from here? A lot of people ask me questions. Can I pass in ID from here? Right? Let me just show it to you. Okay. Let us add one more data into the database. Let's call this as Sachin Tendulkar, right? Let's add Sachin Tendulkar over here. Tendulkar, okay, and let's add it as Sachin, right, and then let's add Sachin, right, and let's add an ID over here, right? Let's add some ID. I have added an ID over here. Let me save it. Let us make an API call once again. Go back, make a post API call. User added successfully. If I go back, if I refresh the page, do you see this? Right? Do you see this? Now Sachin Tendulkar got the ID which I sent manually, right? This is the ID I sent manually from here. It has got this ID. But I would suggest you can modify this ID. I would suggest you to don't play with it. Let MongoDB handle it itself, right? When MongoDB creates the ID, it creates it in a good fashion, right? It keeps its own store, right? It has its own way of handling things up. So don't mess up with it, right? I don't know the repercussions of messing up with it, but I have never got a chance in my life to mess up with these IDs, right? Why to mess up with these IDs? There is no point in doing so, right? And what is this __v? This is your homework. But let me tell you, whenever you create a document and you update the document, it is kind of maintaining the version of that document, right? If you are updating the data of this document, then the version automatically upgrades, right? These values are changed. Don't try to mess up with the automatic fields, right, of MongoDB. Don't try to play with this _ID. Don't try to modify it. Don't even modify __ versions, right? But just don't touch it, right? It's a recommendation by MongoDB, right? And then you can just work with all the other fields that are there, and hope you know this, right? So this Sachin Tendulkar object, I created this ID. Let me just remove this, right? I can just remove this document if I want to. But what I'm trying to say is never create this ID by yourself. Let MongoDB handle its ID for itself, right? So if I add this, now Sachin Tendulkar is already added to our system and object ID is created by itself. Okay, so this is the thing. This is how you add it to the database. You also got to know what is ID, what is __v. Read more about all of it. Read more about MongoDB IDs, right? What is the usefulness of these IDs? Basically, see, whenever you create documents inside the database, so IDs are automatically created. They uniquely identify these objects, and every time a new document is created, this ID remains, right? A new ID is created and that uniquely identifies these documents, and it's very important thing inside MongoDB database. This is all I want to say. Read more about IDs, read more about __v, and practice whatever I have told you in this lecture, right? And let me just add a few more things inside your homework, right? The first thing is, once you have created this user schema and user model, now I will have to create a /signup API to add database, right? To add data to database, right? To add data to database, right? We have added the first database to, right? And then push some documents using API calls, right? Make API calls from Postman, right? Make API calls, right? Make a post API calls, create a post sign up API call, right? Let me write it clearly, post API call, right? And then do it on your own, right? And then save this data. You will feel immense happiness when you do it, right? You will feel very happy, right? Do it till here. One more thing I wanted to tell you before I leave this I'll leave this episode, right? I will talk more about data and I will do a lot more amazing things inside the next episode. We will be diving and playing with a lot of APIs, a lot of data, right? In the next lecture. But what I am trying to say is the the best thing you can do is whenever you are doing some DB operation, whenever you are saving data to the database, whenever you are reading data to the data from the database, whenever you are doing some DB operations, always wrap them inside a try catch block, right? It's a very good practice to wrap all your code inside a try catch block, right? And then handle the responses appropriately. What I'm trying to say is you can do await user.save over here. Once the user is saved successfully, response.send user added successfully, right? But suppose if there was an error, so what you can do is you can send the response automatically, right? Basically, you can send the response, right? You can just add a status code first of all, and you can add a status code 400. It's a bad request, and then you can add error saving the user, right? And then you can also send the error if you want to. You can type in some message, right? Error sending user, and then you can write plus err dot message, right? Or something like that, right? You can read the error. So this is how you can do error handling over here. And a best practice is to always do your error handling so that, you are, because if something fails, you are still sending the relevant information back. Otherwise, your API will be always successful, right? But your user might not have saved, right? Due to some issues. Got it? So now, right, so this is all I wanted to say. There are a lot more things I would want to talk about in this API. First of all, how can I make this data dynamic? How can I make this data dynamic? This is Sachin. I am just hard coding data from here. How can I send data from the API inside this API? I can read it over here and I can push it into the database. We will do all of it. Don't you worry about me. Don't you worry about any of this, my dear friends. We will do everything, right? Whatever you are thinking about, pushing the data to the database, reading from the database, we will do all these things, right? Don't worry about it. Just do till here, right? We will go a little slow. Keep coding along with me. This is very, very important. That is all I wanted to say. And keep doing homework. Whatever homework I am writing it over here, you should do it yourself. With every episode, I am giving you a homework. This is your homework. Do it step by step, right? Suppose and try to do it without seeing me coding. That is when you will become a great developer. Watch my video once, right? And then try to memorize a little. Then write the code yourself by just seeing this, right? Try to do it step by step, right? First of all, if I have written install Mongoose library, install Mongoose library. If I have said connect your application to database, then remember how I connected, do it. And if you get stuck, take the reference of this official MongoDB documentation. This is the best source, okay? So try to take the reference and do it on your own. When you will make this habit, you will become a great developer. I want you all to be very good at reading documentation. This is what I want to fit in your head. Okay, so let's just do this. The second thing is once you have added some data, then do some error handling using try catch. And you always remember that always do error handling whenever you are interacting with your database. Okay, this is all I wanted to cover in this episode, right? Now, let me just push all the code to GitHub, right? I can say database basics, right? Database created, initializing database, right? Init database, okay? I think this is a good commit message for this code, right? Init database, and then I am making a commit. I am syncing the code over there, right? I have added the code over there, but what I want to request is now, my dear friends, go back in your systems, do whatever I did, right? do till here and then come back, watch the next episode. I will cover a lot more amazing things in the next episode. In the next episode, I will show you how to add dynamic data, how to read data from an API, how can you push that data, how can you read a lot of things, read data from the databases. So many dynamic things we are going to do. We are full-fledged into the application now. We have slowly started building our application also. We created our first schema, we created our first model, we created our first database, we created our first document. We did a lot of things in this episode. Hope you would have enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, my dear friends, please share a word about Namaste Node.js and about me, about our courses, to your friends, to your family on social media. Write a post about all what you have learned, right? Summarize everything, write it up on LinkedIn, on Twitter, right? A Twitter thread, a LinkedIn post, or on Instagram. You can also share your notes that you are making on the social media platforms, and whenever you write a post, do tag me along. I would love to read all of them. I would give it a like, I would give it a share if I really like it. And thank you so much for everyone who is already supporting us, who is already referring to us, right? Referring a lot of students to us. And thank you so much for that. Please keep doing that and keep spreading a word about us to a lot of people. It will help me into my mission to reach a lot of students. I want to take this course to a more and more students. And please, if you can write a social media post for us, that would mean a lot to us. Okay? And keep learning, keep rising, and keep coding along with us, and wish you the best in your career ahead. See you in the next episode very soon with a lot more cool stuff. Bye-bye.